So, here's the thing. I didn't want to believe it at first. Hell, I really tried not to, but something just started feeling off with Lisa. It wasn't obvious at first, little things here and there, almost like a drip 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 of suspicion that slowly filled up the bucket. And I didn't know how to deal with it. I still don't, to be honest. She started coming home later. Not much later, just a little. It wasn't like she was out until midnight, but when I asked about her day, it wasn't normal. It was like she was avoiding details, like she'd change the subject real quick or just give me some one-word answer. And maybe I'm just being paranoid, right? But I started noticing stuff. Small stuff. She'd get really touchy about her phone, like really touchy. I'd be on the couch watching TV, and she'd get a text, and then she'd just lock it. Like, fast. Not even a glance to see who it was. Before, she'd always show me funny memes or share some stupid work drama, but now? Nothing. And if I ever asked who it was, she'd just shrug and say, "Oh, just work stuff." The thing is, I knew her work. She was a receptionist, answering calls and managing appointments. It wasn't some high-stress job that required texting late at night or during weekends. And even then, she used to talk about it. But now? It was like pulling teeth to get her to open up about anything. And then the other little things started adding up. She wasn't as affectionate as she used to be. The hugs were shorter, the kisses weren't as deep. I could see her spacing out more during dinner, just staring at her plate like she was somewhere else. It's like she wasn't really here anymore, you know? And that stung. Because we used to talk. About everything. At least, I thought we did. I told myself I was just overthinking. Maybe she was just stressed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And I hated it. I hated how I started obsessing over every little thing she did. How I started questioning whether she'd gone out when she said she was just meeting a friend, or if she was really just at the store. I didn't want to admit it, but the nagging feeling just wouldn't go away. And that's when I started to pay more attention. More than I should have. More than was healthy. But honestly, I didn't know what else to do. I was getting scared. And I hated feeling scared. So, I started tracking her. Not in any creepy stalker-y way, but I paid attention to the time she left, the time she came home. Her schedule. I even noticed when she'd leave her phone out, and I'd peek at the screen for a glimpse, just enough to catch a name, a number or whatever. You'd think I'd have felt guilty doing that, right? But I didn't. Not at first. I just needed answers. The constant guessing was eating at me. Something inside me told me to keep digging. And so I did. I hate to admit this, but it didn't stop with just paying attention to her phone. One day, she left it on the kitchen counter while she went out to run errands. Normally, she never leaves her phone behind, so I figured it was an opportunity to look, just for a minute. Not like I was going to go snooping through everything, just a quick check to see if there was anything strange. My heart was pounding when I picked it up though. I felt guilty the second I grabbed it. But when I unlocked the screen, I saw a message from someone named Mark. My stomach dropped. I didn't even know who he was. The texts weren't anything innocent. One said, "Can't wait to see you again tonight. Let's make it special." And then another one, "Last time was amazing. Can't wait to do it again." I froze. Everything inside me told me to put the phone down, but I kept reading. I couldn't stop myself. The messages kept going, flirty, personal, clearly not work-related. She was planning something with him. Something more than just a casual hangout. I put the phone back down quickly, but I didn't leave. I sat there, trying to tell myself I was overreacting, but I knew. Something was happening, and it wasn't good. I didn't confront her then. Part of me was still hoping I was wrong, that I'd misunderstood. But the more I thought about it, the more everything started to make sense. She'd been distant lately. Her phone was always locked. She'd been getting dressed up more, spending extra time getting ready. And then that Friday, she said she was going out with Mandy, but when I called the restaurant to check if they were there, they said Lisa wasn't there. I couldn't deny it anymore. She was lying. Something was happening. But I still didn't know how to confront her. I didn't know if I was ready to face the truth. I couldn't take it anymore. The tension between us had been building, and that night, when Lisa came home late again, I knew I had to confront her. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. When she walked in, I stood there, blocking the doorway. We need to talk. She froze, then looked at me like she was caught off guard. About what? About you and Mark. My voice was steady, even though my heart was pounding. Her face went pale, and she tried to play it off. What are you talking about? I found the messages on your phone, I said, trying to keep my cool. I know about you and him. She stared at me for a second, then sighed heavily like I was just making things harder. Tom, you don't get it, she said, her tone almost cold. This isn't about him. It's about us. I was lost. What do you mean, us? You haven't seen me in a long time, Tom. You don't appreciate me. I've been trying, but you've been so distant. Mark, he listens to me. He sees me. I felt like I'd been slapped. So you're blaming me for this? She didn't even flinch. I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying that I needed something I wasn't getting here. I needed to feel wanted, Tom. My mind was spinning. You don't cheat to feel wanted, Lisa. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice softer now, but there was no regret. It just did. I just stood there, silent. I didn't know what to say. Everything she said sounded like an excuse. And part of me wanted to fight for us, but another part of me knew that what we had wasn't the same anymore. Do you even want to fix this? I asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. And that's when I realized, maybe, I was the only one still holding onto what we had. The next few days felt like I was walking through a fog. Everything between us was just off. I'd wake up next to her, but it didn't feel like she was really there. We'd have these awkward, empty conversations, like we were strangers trying to pretend everything was normal. She'd go about her day like nothing had happened, and I'd just sit there, holding everything in. I couldn't shake the feeling that the trust we once had was gone. And maybe it had been gone for a while, and I was just too blind to see it. It wasn't just the affair, it was the way she justified it. The way she made it sound like it was my fault, like I deserved this. Every time she'd try to touch me or kiss me, I'd pull away. I didn't want to feel her hands on me when I knew what they'd been doing behind my back. But the hardest part? She wasn't even sorry. Not really. She'd say things like, I never meant to hurt you, but it always sounded more like a way to make herself feel better than any real remorse. She was sorry it came out, not sorry for what she'd done. And that made it worse. I couldn't decide what I wanted. Part of me was still clinging to the hope that we could fix it, but the other part, the bigger part, knew that this was a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Could I ever forgive her? Could I ever go back to how things were? That night, I decided to do something I'd been avoiding. I called Mark. I don't know why I thought it would help. Maybe I was hoping he'd admit to everything, and that somehow it would make the situation clearer. Maybe I thought it would make me feel better, like I had control of the situation. He answered on the second ring, and when I told him who I was, there was this long pause. Tom, he said, his voice low, almost a little nervous. I didn't know it was like that. I didn't know you were married. I don't care what you knew, I snapped. You knew she was with me, didn't you? Yeah, he said quietly. But look, man, she told me she was going through some stuff. I didn't mean for it to get this far, okay? I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask how he could live with himself, how he could just go along with this. But instead I just said, stay away from her. I didn't want to hear him apologize or make excuses. When I hung up, it didn't feel like a victory. If anything, it just made the whole thing more real. The guy didn't even feel guilty. He just sounded like he regretted getting caught. I went to bed that night and lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, thinking about everything Lisa had said. I needed to feel wanted. It echoed in my mind like a knife in my chest. I wanted to believe her. I really did. I wanted to think that we could somehow find our way back. But it didn't feel like we were in this together anymore. It felt like I was fighting alone. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to keep fighting. After I talked to Mark, things got even quieter between Lisa and me. She'd go about her day like nothing had changed, but I couldn't pretend. Every word felt empty. Every look felt forced. I don't know if she was trying to keep the peace or just didn't care anymore, but I wasn't buying it. I wasn't ready to pretend anymore either. It's weird, because it wasn't like she stopped being there physically. She'd still make dinner, still do the laundry, still try to initiate small talk. But emotionally, she was checked out. And so was I. I couldn't bring myself to look at her the same way after everything. It wasn't just the affair anymore, it was how she made me feel small, like I was the one who failed her. It wasn't until one night, about a week after the conversation, that I realized how much I'd been holding back. I was sitting in the living room, zoning out in front of the TV, when she sat down next to me. Not close, but not far either. Just there. Like it was something we were supposed to do. "You okay?" she asked, and for a split second, there was that old softness in her voice, the way she used to sound when she actually cared. But the thing was, I wasn't okay. I hadn't been for days. I looked at her, and for a moment, I just couldn't find the words. Part of me wanted to yell at her, to ask her how she could have done this to us. Another part wanted to ask if she felt guilty, if she even cared that she'd torn everything apart. But instead, all I said was, "No, I'm not." She didn't say anything for a while. She just looked down at her hands. Finally, after a long pause, she let out this sigh. "Tom, I didn't mean for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. I don't know how we got here." I wanted to throw the words back at her. To tell her she didn't have to go this far. That she didn't have to cheat to make me notice her. But I didn't. I just nodded. "Yeah," I said quietly. "You're right. I don't know how we got here either." And that was it. The silence between us filled the space. There was no resolution. No apology. No promise to fix things. Just this unbearable distance. The next few days were no better. I tried to go through the motions, to act like I wasn't constantly thinking about the cracks in our marriage. But every time she touched me, every time she tried to talk, all I could think about was Mark. Every time I looked at her, I saw the way she looked at him. And I didn't know how to move past it. It became clear that this wasn't something we could easily fix. She hadn't even said the words I needed to hear, "I'm sorry." Not really. She was sorry that I found out, sure, but I wasn't convinced she was truly sorry for what she'd done. The longer we went on like this, the more I started wondering if I even wanted to stay. I wasn't sure what I was holding on to anymore. The woman I loved wasn't the same person who'd come home late, who'd hidden her phone, who'd justified betraying me. I thought maybe I needed to be angry, that the anger would drive me to do something, anything, to fix this. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was just exhausted. And I think deep down, I was starting to accept that maybe there was no going back. It hit me one afternoon, like a punch to the gut. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone when I saw a notification. It was from Lisa's email, something I didn't normally check, but for some reason, I clicked on it. It wasn't a work email or a family message. It was a confirmation for a hotel reservation. A weekend getaway. 4-2. I don't know why, but seeing that felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I didn't even have to open the email fully. The subject line alone was enough to make my head spin. Reservation confirmed, room 204, king bed, 2 adults. She hadn't even told me she was planning to go away. But she was. And it was with Mark. I knew it before I even looked at the details. I couldn't breathe. Everything started to blur, and the world felt like it was folding in on itself. I had so many questions. How long had she been planning this? Was this the special night she'd mentioned in those texts? Why the hell hadn't she told me? It felt like she was trying to disappear, like she was already gone and didn't even have the decency to tell me. I left the kitchen, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold onto my phone. I didn't want to confront her yet. Not over this. Not like this. I needed to think. I needed to make sense of everything before I lost it. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I knew what I had to do. I had to confront her. Now. No more avoiding it. I waited until she came home that evening. The moment she stepped through the door, I just knew. There was something different about her. Maybe it was the way she was trying to act normal, like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. It hadn't been fine for weeks. I didn't wait. I didn't give her a chance to settle in. I just threw the email down on the table. "What's this?" I asked, my voice tight. Her eyes widened, but she didn't seem that surprised. Not the way I expected. She just sighed, this tired, almost resigned sigh, like she'd known this moment was coming. "Tom, please," she said, rubbing her forehead. "It's not what you think." "What's it then?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Tell me, Lisa, because right now, I don't know what to believe anymore." She looked at me for a moment, and for the first time, I saw something different in her eyes. Guilt. But not enough. Not enough to make her stop. We've been planning this for a while. Mark and I. Just a weekend away to clear my head. I didn't want to hurt you. But I couldn't keep lying. I just needed some space, Tom. I need something to feel good about again. I couldn't even process what she said. You think running off with him will fix this? I asked, my voice shaky with disbelief. I don't know, she whispered. But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending I'm happy when I'm not. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw things. I wanted to punch the wall, break something. But instead, I just stood there frozen. I couldn't decide if I was angry or just numb. I never thought I'd be here, she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper now. But I've been unhappy for a long time, Tom. And I couldn't just keep going through the motions. I needed to feel alive again. And there it was. The truth, finally. But it didn't make it better. It didn't change anything. I couldn't look at her anymore the same way I did before. She wasn't the woman I married. She wasn't the person I thought I knew. I didn't even know what to say to that. I just turned and walked out of the room. I didn't want to hear her excuses anymore. I didn't want to be anywhere near her. I spent the rest of the night in the spare room, lying awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about everything, our life, our marriage, our family, and I realized that no matter how much I wanted things to go back to normal, they never would. Things had already shifted, and there was no undoing it. I didn't even know if I could go on pretending anymore. But one thing was for sure, this was the breaking point. The point where everything changed. And I had no idea where to go from here. The next few days were unbearable. Every time I looked at Lisa, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. It wasn't just the affair anymore, it was the lies, the justifications, and the way she'd completely disconnected from me. I couldn't get past the fact that she had already made her decision, already planned this weekend getaway. It was like she was choosing him, even before I knew. I didn't know what to do. Part of me still wanted to fight for us. Wanted to believe that we could somehow put the pieces back together. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't the first time I'd been left in the dark. There were other moments, small ones, that had been building up, signs I ignored, things I shrugged off. That night, Lisa came into the spare room while I was trying to sleep. She stood there in the doorway for a long time, just watching me. When I finally looked at her, she took a deep breath, like she was about to say something important. "I'm sorry, Tom," she said, her voice soft. "I never wanted it to end up like this. I never wanted to hurt you." I didn't respond right away. I just stared at her. Sorry. That word meant nothing anymore. It wasn't enough to fix the mess she'd made. It wasn't enough to undo everything. "You don't get to say that," I finally said, my voice steady but cold. "Sorry isn't going to fix this. It's too late for that." She didn't argue. She didn't try to make excuses or tell me it was my fault. She just nodded, like she knew it was over too. I spent the next few hours lying awake, turning everything over in my head. And I realized something. I couldn't stay in this marriage anymore. Not like this. Not with her still planning weekends away, still choosing him over me. The next morning, I didn't say anything at first. But as I watched her pack her bag for her trip, the finality of it hit me. It was over. I wasn't going to be the guy she cheated on anymore. I wasn't going to let this keep destroying me. I looked at her one last time before she left, and for the first time in weeks, I felt calm. "I think you should go," I said quietly. "And I think it's time for us to be done." She didn't fight it. She just nodded, grabbed her bag, and left. I watched her go. And as the door shut behind her, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. The house felt different after Lisa left. It wasn't just the emptiness. It was the quiet. The kind of quiet that comes with a final decision being made. I didn't have to deal with her excuses anymore or her half-hearted attempts at fixing things. It was over. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The first few days alone weren't easy. I kept expecting her to come back, to apologize again, to tell me she made a mistake. But she didn't. She never did. She went on that weekend trip, came back, and just kept going. No calls, no messages. She was done. I could tell. I went through the motions, cleaning up, picking up the pieces of what was left. It was like my whole life had been a house of cards, and someone had knocked it over. But as I started picking up the cards, something became clear. There wasn't as much to pick up as I thought. Some of the pieces were broken, yeah. Some of the pieces were lost. But some of them, the most important ones, were still here. I was still here. I wasn't sure what the future looked like. Divorce wasn't on my mind just yet. I still wasn't ready to make that decision. But I started taking things one step at a time. I signed up for a gym, started working out again. I hadn't realized how out of shape I'd gotten over the past few months, trying to hold everything together. Now, I just focused on me. And then came the moment I wasn't expecting. About a week after Lisa left, my brother Greg called me up. He'd been one of the few people I hadn't told about what was going on, mainly because I didn't want to talk about it. But when he asked how I was doing, I couldn't hide it anymore. Man, I don't even know what to say, I told him. It's like everything's just shattered. I feel like I've been living a lie for years. There was silence on the other end of the phone. Tom, you don't deserve this. You know that, right? Yeah, I said, my voice quieter now. I do. But it doesn't make it hurt less. Greg didn't say anything for a while, but when he did, it was the first bit of advice that made any sense. You're gonna be okay, Tom. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but you're gonna be okay. You just have to take it day by day. Don't make any big decisions right now. Just take care of yourself. That hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't really thought about taking care of myself. I'd been too caught up in the mess of it all. But Greg was right. I needed time. I needed space to heal. To figure out who I was without Lisa. And that's what I started doing. I began spending more time with friends, doing things I loved. I even started picking up old hobbies, things I used to do before everything with Lisa took over. The more I focused on myself, the more I realized I didn't want to go back to the life I had with her. It wasn't easy, but I was starting to heal. I was starting to feel like me again. And as time went on, I began to understand that maybe this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something else. Something I could control. Lisa made her choice. And now, I was making mine. It had been a few months since Lisa left. Life had slowly started to take on a new rhythm. I was still figuring things out, trying to get my footing, piece together what I wanted moving forward, but I was better. A lot better than I thought I'd be. People talk about how things get better with time, and I never really understood it until now. But honestly, it wasn't time alone that helped me, it was distance. Distance from her. From everything that reminded me of what I had lost. I'd started seeing a therapist. At first, I wasn't sure if it would help. But it did. Talking to someone who didn't know me personally, who didn't have any judgment, who just listened. It gave me a fresh perspective. It made me realize that, while I wasn't perfect, I wasn't the cause of what happened either. The betrayal was on her, not me. I also found myself reconnecting with people I hadn't seen in a while. Old friends, people I'd pushed away when things with Lisa had gotten hard. They all had the same reaction when they saw me again. Man, you're looking good. It's like you're a different person. And in a way, I was. I was no longer the guy in the corner of the room, avoiding eye contact with everyone, consumed by the weight of a broken marriage. I was becoming me again. The guy who didn't have to explain himself. The guy who had his own life to live, separate from all the chaos that Lisa had dragged me into. Then, just as I was starting to feel like things were really moving forward, I got a text. It was from Lisa. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a solid minute. The old part of me, the part that wanted closure, the part that still wanted answers, was tempted. But the bigger part of me, the part that had learned to let go, just felt exhausted. I didn't know if I was ready to open that door again. I didn't even know if I wanted to. I didn't respond right away. In fact, I didn't respond at all that night. Instead, I sat with it. I went for a walk, cleared my head. I thought about everything we'd been through. The betrayal. The heartache. The endless attempts at fixing something that couldn't be fixed. And I realized something. I didn't owe her anything anymore. The next morning, I sent a simple reply. I'm doing fine, Lisa. I think it's best if we just move on. That was it. No drama. No accusations. Just, done. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought that would give me some closure, but for some reason, it didn't. I didn't feel triumphant or at peace. It just felt final. And while that might sound like the same thing, it wasn't. Closure is supposed to feel like relief. But for me, it just felt like another door closing, another chapter that had ended without me being ready for it. A week later, I heard through a mutual friend that Lisa had started dating again. I didn't ask who, and I didn't care. Part of me was angry, how quickly she moved on after everything. But another part of me, the part one didn't want to admit, felt jealous? Not because I wanted her back, but because I didn't know if I was ready to move on like that. It made me realize how much I still had to figure out. But no matter how much I wanted to stay stuck in that moment, I knew it wasn't healthy. I knew I couldn't keep comparing my progress to hers. It wasn't a race. I wasn't sure what the future held. Maybe I'd meet someone new eventually. Maybe not. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of the unknown. Because no matter where life took me next, I knew I was in control. I knew I was stronger than I gave myself credit for. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to turn the page. A couple of months went by since Lisa and I had our final exchange. The weight I'd been carrying for so long started to feel lighter. It wasn't that I'd fully forgiven her. It wasn't that I even wanted to. But I was starting to realize that forgiveness wasn't about her, it was about me. It was about letting go of the anger, the hurt, and the resentment I'd been holding on to. Because holding on to it only kept me tied to the past, and I was done living there. Life was starting to feel more normal, more mine. I was still living in the same house, but it didn't feel like her house anymore. I'd taken down the photos of us together, the ones where we looked happy. I wasn't ready to forget, but I wasn't ready to keep pretending that part of me still existed. I had to clear out the old memories to make space for the new ones I was starting to create. I had a moment, about 3 months after everything went down, when I was sitting outside on the back porch one evening. It had just rained, and the air felt fresh. I was drinking a beer, just thinking about life and how much had changed in such a short time. For the first time, I felt at peace. No drama. No questions. Just quiet. It was almost like the storm inside me had passed, and now the world was still again. I thought about what Greg had said to me a while ago, about taking things day by day. And honestly, I think that's the best advice I've gotten through all this. I didn't have to make any grand decisions yet. I didn't have to rush to find closure or answers. I just needed to live my life, take it as it came, and keep going forward. The thing is, even though I was moving on, part of me knew I was still healing. There were days when the loneliness would hit, when I'd remember what it felt like to have her around, and it stung. But those days were fewer and farther between. I was finally starting to feel like I wasn't just a guy who had been hurt, but a guy who could stand up again, someone who had survived. One day, a few weeks later, I ran into Mark. I wasn't expecting to see him, but there he was, walking down the street. We made eye contact, and for a second, I felt this tension in the air. But it wasn't anger that I felt. I didn't even want to fight him. He didn't deserve that. He just nodded at me awkwardly and said, "Hey Tom." I nodded back, but there was no hatred in it. No burning need for vengeance. Just a quiet understanding that whatever had happened between us didn't have to be anything more than that. We didn't need to speak. We didn't need to hash anything out. We'd both made our choices, and there was no need to keep dwelling on it. I walked away, and for the first time since everything had started, I felt like I had control over what was left of my life. I wasn't sure what would happen next. Maybe I'd meet someone. Maybe not. Maybe I'd spend more time alone, finding out who I was without Lisa. But I was okay with that. Sometimes, I'd still think about her. Wonder how she was doing, if she was truly happy. But then I'd remind myself that it didn't matter anymore. We'd been two people who'd loved each other once, but we weren't those people anymore. And that was okay. For now, I was focused on the future, whatever that might look like. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't letting the past define me anymore. I was moving forward. One step at a time. As time passed, I realized I was no longer the guy who couldn't get out of bed in the morning. I wasn't the guy sitting at home, lost in the past, wondering where everything went wrong. I had found a new rhythm. I was getting back to doing things I loved, taking weekend hikes, getting into photography, even cooking meals I hadn't had the energy to cook in years. My friends noticed the difference, too. When I'd meet up with them, I wasn't the divorced guy anymore. I was just Tom again. The guy who liked to joke around. The guy who was starting to feel hopeful about the future. The guy who wasn't defined by a marriage that had failed. I still hadn't fully figured out what the next chapter looked like. I hadn't jumped into dating. Honestly, the thought of being with someone else felt too soon. But I didn't feel rushed. I knew I had time. I had a whole life ahead of me. The idea of love didn't seem so complicated anymore. It didn't have to be perfect, and it didn't have to fix everything. It just had to be real. One night, about 6 months after Lisa left, I bumped into her again. This time, it was at a mutual friend's party. She was with a guy. I didn't know who he was, but they seemed comfortable. Laughing, talking, looking at each other like they were happy. It stung a little, I won't lie. Seeing her like that, so moved on, but at the same time, I didn't feel angry. Just resigned. She saw me across the room, and for a split second, I thought she might come over. But she didn't. She just smiled, nodded, and that was it. She didn't have to explain herself. She didn't owe me anything. And I didn't owe her the satisfaction of showing how much it hurt. I walked away from that night feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. She had moved on. And I had too. That was the moment I realized I was no longer holding on to what was lost. I wasn't bitter or looking for revenge. I wasn't obsessed with why things happened or trying to figure out what went wrong. I had accepted it for what it was. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was free. The truth was, we all move on eventually. Some quicker than others. But at the end of the day, life doesn't stop. And neither do you. I still had a lot to figure out, but I was excited to see where things would go from here. I didn't need closure. I didn't need answers. What I needed was to let go. And I had. The months after that party passed in a blur, but in a good way. I was no longer consumed by the pain of what had happened with Lisa. I'd finally given myself permission to let go of that weight. I started spending more time with my family. My brother Greg and I got closer. We went on weekend trips, watched football games together, and joked like we used to when we were younger. It was like I was remembering who I was before all the chaos of marriage took over. At work, I started taking on bigger projects. I even got promoted, which felt like a small victory. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was succeeding at something that was just for me. I met a few women here and there, but nothing serious. And that was fine. I wasn't looking for something to fill the gap. I had learned the hard way that rushing into something to escape the pain never worked. Instead, I focused on me. On building my own happiness again, without relying on anyone else. And then, a year after Lisa left, I got a message. It was from her. "Tom, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I don't know if we'll ever be able to be friends, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're doing well." I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't feel anger when I read it, but I didn't feel the need to rush to forgive her either. I'd moved on. I'd let go of the past. And I wasn't sure I needed anything from her now, except maybe closure, for both of us. So I wrote back. "Thank you for reaching out. I'm doing well. I hope you're happy." And that was it. It wasn't some big emotional exchange. It wasn't about rekindling anything. It was just two people acknowledging their past and moving forward in different directions. For the first time in a long time, I felt okay with that. We didn't need to fix everything. We didn't need to get closure or find some perfect ending. Sometimes, things just end. And that's okay. I wasn't looking for a happy ending, because I already had one. I was living it. Every day, every step forward. And that was enough. About a year and a half after Lisa left, I found myself in a place I never thought I'd get to. It wasn't about being over what happened. I don't think you ever really get over something like that. But I had moved on. The hurt wasn't as raw anymore. It was more like a scar, still there, but not as painful. One Saturday afternoon, I was sitting at a local coffee shop, just sipping on my usual black coffee, scrolling through my phone. A notification popped up, an invite to a small gathering from an old friend, Jake. I hadn't seen Jake in years, but we'd always gotten along. It was one of those friendships that never required much effort but was always easy. It was a low-key gathering, just a few people, drinks, some music. No pressure. I almost didn't go. But I was in one of those moods where staying home just felt like too much. So I went. When I arrived, the place had a warm, easygoing vibe. People were scattered in little groups, chatting and laughing. I didn't know most of the people, but it didn't matter. After a few beers and some small talk, I found myself talking to a woman named Sarah. She was kind, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in the things I had to say. We talked about books, movies, the kind of random stuff you talk about when you're just getting to know someone. For a second, I almost forgot the mess that had been my life a year ago. I wasn't thinking about Lisa, or the divorce, or the anger I'd held on to. It was just me and Sarah, having a good time. By the end of the night, we exchanged numbers, both a little tipsy but smiling. There was no pressure, no what's next. We didn't even talk about dating. It was simple, comfortable, and for the first time in a long time, it felt good to talk to someone without all the baggage. I wasn't jumping into anything with Sarah. I wasn't trying to force myself to be something I wasn't ready to be. But it was a reminder that I could be open to new connections. I didn't have to stay stuck in the past forever. Over the next few weeks, we kept in touch. We went out a couple of times, got to know each other better. I found myself smiling when I saw her name pop up on my phone. But even then, I wasn't rushing things. I knew from experience that taking my time was important. One evening, about a month later, Sarah and I were sitting on a park bench, watching the sunset. It felt easy, like this was how things were supposed to be. Not rushed. Not forced. Just real. That night, as we said goodbye, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: hope. Not for the future or for what might come next, but for just being here in this moment, enjoying life as it was. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about Lisa. I wasn't comparing Sarah to her or wondering if I was moving too fast. I was just thinking about how good it felt to connect with someone again. I wasn't rushing to figure out where things were headed. All I knew was that I was okay. And for now, that was enough. A few more months passed. Sarah and I continued to see each other, but it was nothing serious, yet. I didn't want to overthink things, and I didn't want to rush anything. I liked how easy it felt. It was a fresh start, and honestly, I wasn't looking to complicate it by putting labels on it too soon. We spent weekends together, laughed a lot, and shared things we hadn't in a long time. But there were no heavy expectations. And then, out of nowhere, I got a call one evening. It was from Lisa. I hadn't heard from her in months. Not since that simple message she sent apologizing. To be honest, I hadn't really thought about her much since then. Life had kept me busy, and in a weird way, I felt like I was finally starting to move forward without her in it. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I'd let go of all that. But hearing her voice on the other end of the phone still took me by surprise. "Tom," she said, her voice sounding hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she should be calling at all. I know this is probably out of nowhere, but I just wanted to see how you were doing." I didn't know what to say at first. I thought about the last time we talked, how she'd moved on, how I had too. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. But it was just weird to hear her voice again. I wasn't sure what she was looking for. "I'm doing fine, Lisa," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Things are good. You?" There was a pause before she answered. "I'm good," she said quietly. I just wanted to say again that I'm sorry. For everything. I don't know if I ever properly apologized, but I want you to know I regret how things ended between us." I felt a wave of emotions wash over me, surprise, confusion, even a little sadness. But I didn't let it show. I wasn't the same guy I had been when she left. I had a life now, and while I could acknowledge the past, I wasn't going to get caught up in it again. "You don't need to apologize again, Lisa," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I've moved on, and I think it's time we both let the past stay there. We've both changed. And I'm okay." There was another silence on the other end. She let out a soft sigh, almost as if she was disappointed. Or maybe it was relief. I couldn't tell. "I just wanted to make sure you're happy," she said, her voice almost soft, like she was unsure whether I'd accept that sentiment. "I hope you are." I thought about Sarah for a second, about how good things were with her. I wasn't jumping into anything, but I was open to the possibility of something new. And in that moment, I realized something. I was happy. Not because of her. Not because of anything that happened between us. But because I had found peace. I had found a way to live my life without carrying the weight of our failed marriage around with me every day. "I said, the words coming out easier than I expected. I'm doing well. Lisa stayed quiet for a while after that, and then we said our goodbyes. There was no big emotional breakthrough. No dramatic confrontation. It was just over. For good. No lingering attachments. No unfinished business. Just two people acknowledging that they had shared something once, but that was no longer part of who they were. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a few minutes. It was strange in a way, hearing from her after all this time. But at the same time, it didn't really change anything for me. I wasn't stuck in the past anymore. I wasn't holding on to any of the old feelings or expectations. I was moving forward, no matter what. And as I thought about Sarah and how easy things felt with her, I realized that I was ready for whatever came next. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted it. I had a chance to build something new, and that was all I needed. That night, I went to bed without a single regret. A few months went by after the call from Lisa. Life, as it does, continued to move forward. Sarah and I were still seeing each other, and things were feeling more comfortable, more real. We hadn't labeled anything, and that was fine. I wasn't looking for a relationship to fill some void or to fix what was broken before. I wasn't even sure what we were, and that felt okay. We were two people sharing time together, figuring things out as we went. No pressure. No rush. I spent more time with friends, went out to bars I hadn't been to in ages, even went to a concert one night, something I hadn't done in so long. I had started living for myself again, and it felt freeing. I was taking things day by day, making sure I didn't lose sight of what mattered to me. But as I reflected on everything, on the pain, the betrayal, and how far I'd come, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't the same person I was when Lisa and I first split up. I wasn't the guy who would have gone crawling back to her if she called. I wasn't the person holding on to what had been, hoping for something that could never be. I wasn't perfect, but I was whole. I had learned how to find peace within myself, to let go of anger, to forgive, not for her but for me. The past was what it was. I didn't need to keep picking at it. And now, the future? I wasn't sure exactly what it would look like. Maybe it was Sarah, maybe not. Maybe it was just me continuing to grow, to explore, and to enjoy life. Whatever came next, I wasn't afraid of it. Lisa had her own path now. I had mine. And both of us were moving forward, even if we never fully understood the reasons behind what had happened. In the end, I realized that sometimes there isn't some big dramatic conclusion to a story. Sometimes it just fades into a quiet, peaceful resolution, and that's enough. For now, I was content. I had found my balance. I had found myself. And no matter where life took me, I knew I was ready.